Alaric Nocturne wasn't a king you challenged. He was the dark heartbeat of the immortal realm, the ancient ruler whose name alone could silence a room of predators. But his greatest weakness wasn't an enemy army or the council's whispers of succession. It was his daughter, Lyra. She had never made a sound. Specialists called it selective mutism caused by the trauma of a blood moon birth, but Alaric called it his curse. That silence remained unbroken until a candlelit evening at the House Nocturne's grand banquet, when the most feared immortal in existence froze in absolute terror because, for the first time in her life, his daughter spoke. She didn't ask for her father. She pointed a small, trembling hand at a terrified human waitress and whispered a word that would burn the night court's foundations to ash. Mama. The snow was falling in silent sheets beyond the arched windows of House Nocturne's great hall, blanketing the eternal grounds in white that would never melt. This wasn't a place where mortals came to dine. It was where treaties were signed in blood, alliances were forged under ancient law, and sometimes where immortals quietly ceased to exist between the first course and dessert. Elena Vale adjusted her serving tray in the preparation alcove, her hands shaking slightly. She was 26, with tired eyes that carried the weight of grief most people didn't accumulate in a lifetime. She'd only been working at House Nocturne for 2 weeks, a miracle placement, or so she thought. Welcome back to the channel, Story Family. Today, we're diving into a world where immortal kings rule the night, where a single word can shatter centuries of lies, and where a mother's love proves stronger than any ancient magic. This is The Vampire King's Daughter Spoke Her First Word, a story of stolen truths, forbidden bonds, and a family forged not by blood alone, but by sacrifice. If you're ready for a tale that will grip your heart and refuse to let go, hit that subscribe button right now. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because tomorrow I'll be back with another story that's just as captivating, and you absolutely don't want to miss it. Now, let's begin. The pay was enough to keep her small room in the outer district heated, and in a world ruled by vampires, that was everything. Elena. Focus. The voice belonged to Kasia, the head steward, a severe woman whose silver hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her already pale skin. She gripped Elena's shoulder with cold fingers. Table 1 is occupied tonight. Do not make eye contact unless directly addressed. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not let your heartbeat quicken. Do you understand me? Elena frowned, carefully polishing a crystal goblet that probably cost more than her year's wages. Who is it? The council head. Kasia's face went ashen, an impressive feat for someone already bloodless.
Worse.
King Alaric himself. The preparation room went deathly silent. The sous chef stopped garnishing plates. Even the ancient butler seemed to pause mid-step. Every human servant in the night court knew the name. Alaric Nocturne wasn't simply a vampire lord. He was the Vampire King, ruler of the immortal realm for over 6 centuries, commander of armies that had never lost a war, architect of laws that bent nations. He was a widower, famous for his absolute brutality toward those who defied him and his suffocating isolation from the world. I'll take the table, Elena whispered, though every survival instinct screamed at her to flee through the servants' passage and never return. She needed the money. More than that, she needed to stop thinking about the empty, aching space inside her that had never healed. She stepped through the velvet curtain onto the banquet floor. The atmosphere had transformed. The usual hum of immortal conversation, smooth, predatory, centuries-old voices debating philosophy and conquest, had dropped to a tense murmur. At table 1, the seat of absolute power positioned with a view of every entrance, yet cloaked in shadow, sat a figure who looked carved from marble and malice. Alaric Nocturne was ageless in the way only the ancient ones were, appearing perhaps 35 in mortal years, but his eyes betrayed millennia. He wore a black suit that seemed to absorb light, his platinum hair pulled back to reveal a face of sharp, inhuman beauty. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow, rumored to be from a blade that should have killed him 3 centuries ago. But it wasn't the king that seized Elena's attention. It was the child. Seated in an ornate high chair beside him was a little girl, perhaps 3 years old. She had hair like spun moonlight and wide, luminous eyes the color of twilight, too knowing, too ancient for such a young face. She clutched a small silver rabbit, worn smooth from constant holding. This was Lyra Nocturne, the blood moon child, the silent heir. Whispers in the servant quarters said she'd never spoken. Not to priests, not to healers, not to her father. A mystery that had confounded even the night court's most powerful magic users. Elena approached the table, crystal decanter of blood wine in hand, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain every vampire in the hall could hear it. "Your Majesty," she managed, her voice steadier than her hands. "Blood wine or winter's vintage?" Alaric didn't look up from the contract he was reviewing. His voice was glacier cold. "Blood wine. And warmed milk for the child. Not hot warm." "Of course." As Elena leaned forward to pour the deep crimson liquid into Alaric's goblet, her wrist brushed the edge of the table. A faint scent drifted from her skin, lavender soap and something softer, more human. The cheap kind she bought from the Mortal District Market. Alaric went rigid. He looked up, his eyes, silver blue and utterly inhuman, locking onto hers with an intensity that made her knees buckle. For one impossible second, Elena saw something flash across his face. Recognition? Anguish? But it vanished like smoke, replaced by the familiar mask of absolute control. "Be quick," he commanded, voice sharp as a blade. Elena nodded and turned toward the child, forcing warmth into her voice despite the king's ice. "And for you, little one," she whispered, crouching slightly to meet the girl's eye level. Lyra slowly lifted her head. When their eyes met, the world fractured. Elena felt a jolt, electric, visceral, impossible, slam through her chest like a physical blow. It was a sensation she hadn't experienced in years. Not since that nightmare day 3 years ago when she'd woken in a sterile clinic room, drugged and hollow, told by a grim-faced doctor that her baby hadn't survived. The phantom ache in her abdomen, the one that never fully disappeared, flared to life, sudden and vicious. Lyra dropped her silver rabbit. It hit the marble floor with a soft clink. The great hall was never quiet. Immortals didn't do silence. But table one became a void. A pocket of absolute stillness in a room full of predators. The little girl's mouth opened. Her bottom lip trembled. Tears began pooling in those impossible twilight eyes. Alaric noticed immediately. He leaned forward, and for the first time, Elena heard fear in the vampire king's voice. "Lyra. Stellina. What's wrong? Are you hurt?" Lyra ignored him. She reached out both small hands toward the waitress, fingers grasping desperately at Elena's simple black uniform. Elena stood frozen, the decanter trembling in her grip. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She felt an overwhelming, illogical compulsion to drop everything and gather this child into her arms. Then it happened. The sound was small, broken, like a door that hadn't been opened in years, hinges rusted shut, finally giving way. "Ma." Alaric froze mid-reach. He slowly turned his head from his daughter to the human woman standing before him. His hand moved a subtle, lethal shift towards something concealed beneath his jacket. "Mama." The word came louder this time, clearer. The entire banquet hall went silent. Forks paused. Immortals turned. Even the ancient lords at the council table stopped mid-sentence. Elena's vision blurred with tears she couldn't explain. I should go, Your Majesty. I apologize." She tried to step back, but Lyra lunged forward in her chair with surprising strength, small face contorting with desperate longing. She pointed one trembling finger directly at Elena's face. "Mama." The word echoed off the vaulted ceilings, through the crystal chandeliers, across centuries of silence. "Mama."
Up.
"Mama, up." Alaric rose. The chair scraped against ancient stone. He was tall, impossibly tall, and radiated a danger that made the royal guard stationed at the hall's entrance place hands on their weapons. He looked at his daughter, who was reaching for a stranger with a desperation he'd never seen in her. Then he looked at Elena. His face was a mask of confusion and rising fury. When he spoke, his voice was a predator's growl that promised violence. "Who are you?" Each word was precise, controlled, lethal. "Who sent you here?" "No one," Elena stammered, backing away, clutching the empty decanter like a shield. I'm just a servant. I've never met you. I swear on my life." "My daughter," Alaric said, moving around the table with inhuman grace, closing the distance between them in heartbeats, "has never spoken. Not once. Not to healers who've served this court for centuries. Not to me." He stopped inches from her, towering, lethal. "And tonight, she calls you mother." He seized Elena's wrist. His grip was iron wrapped in ice, not crushing, but inescapable. He lifted her arm, examining her forearm in the candlelight, searching for something. A mark, a spell, a sigil. Proof of conspiracy. "Please, let me go." "Daddy, no." Lyra's voice rang out. A complete sentence, her second ever spoken. The words were clumsy but clear, carrying on a child's righteous fury. "Daddy, don't hurt Mama." The servants stood paralyzed. Kasha had pulled out a summoning crystal, ready to call the enforcers, but one of Alaric's shadow guards simply shook his head at her. "No intervention. Not yet." Alaric stared at Elena, his breathing uneven, something that shouldn't happen to a creature who didn't need air. He studied her face, the shape of her jaw, the green gold of her eyes. Then he looked back at Lyra. The resemblance was faint, hidden beneath baby softness and different coloring. But it was there, undeniable once you saw it, in the eyes. But that was impossible. Alaric's queen, the woman who had carried and birthed Lyra, was dead. She had died during childbirth 3 years ago in a private birthing chamber deep within House Nocturne. Alaric had been there. He had held the body. He had sealed the tomb himself. Unless the past 3 years had been a lie. Alaric released Elena's wrist, but didn't step back. His expression was unreadable, fury and calculation warring behind ancient eyes. He made a single gesture with 2 fingers. From the shadows emerged a figure Elena hadn't noticed, a massive man in dark armor, face scarred from battles that would have killed anyone mortal 10 times over. "Bruno," Alaric said quietly, never taking his eyes off Elena. "Seal the hall. No one leaves. And summon Dr. Cade." His voice dropped to something that might have been a question, or might have been a threat. "We're going to find out exactly who you are." Bruno's grip on Elena's arm was firm but not cruel as he guided her through a side passage away from the banquet hall. 2 more guards flanked them, their boots silent on the ancient stone despite their armor. Elena's heart hammered so violently she thought it might crack her ribs. Behind them, Lyra's screams echoed through the corridor, raw, desperate sounds that tore at something deep inside Elena's chest. "Mama, Mama, come back." Elena stumbled. Her knees nearly gave out. The sound wasn't just heartbreaking, it was physical. Each cry sent waves of pain through her body, centering in her abdomen where that phantom ache lived, where it had lived for 3 years. "Keep moving," Bruno said, not unkindly, but his hand remained locked on her arm. They descended a spiral staircase into the lower levels of House Nocturne, where the walls transitioned from ornate marble to bare stone. Not a dungeon. Elena had heard stories about those, but not exactly welcoming either. Bruno pushed open a heavy wooden door to reveal a sparse room, a table, 2 chairs, a single window too narrow for escape. "Wait here. The king will speak with you shortly." The door closed. The lock clicked. Elena sank into the chair, her entire body trembling. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the tears, trying to breathe. This isn't real. This can't be real. But the ache in her chest said otherwise. The memory surfaced like something drowning finally breaking the surface. Elena had been 23, desperate, drowning in debt after her mother's illness. The medical bills had consumed everything, the small apartment, the savings, any hope of finishing university. Then the letter arrived. Cream-colored paper, wax seal, an offer that seemed impossible. A medical contract with House Nocturne. Compensation, 50,000 in gold. Duration, 6 months. Discretion required. Inquire within. She'd gone to the address, a private clinic on the edge of the Immortal District. Sterile white walls. No windows. A woman in silver scrubs who never gave her name. You're healthy. Young. The blood work is promising. What exactly is this for? Elena had asked. The woman's smile hadn't reached her eyes. A noble family requires a surrogate. The mother is unable to carry to term due to complications of immortality. You would be compensated generously. The child would be cared for. You would walk away debt-free. Elena remembered signing papers she barely read. Remembered telling herself it was temporary, that she was helping someone. She remembered the first injection, cold fire in her veins. The way her body changed over the following months, swelling with impossible life. The way the pregnancy felt different somehow. Faster. Stranger. And she remembered the birth. The pain had been inhuman. Splitting. Like her body was being torn apart from the inside. She screamed until her voice gave out. The room had been dim, surgical lights glaring down. Figures in masks surrounded her. One of them, tall, ancient, with eyes that gleamed silver behind his surgical mask, had leaned close. You're doing beautifully, my dear. Just a bit longer. His voice was smooth, hypnotic. When it was finally over, when the agony stopped, Elena had reached out with shaking hands. My baby, she'd whispered. Please, I want to see. The masked doctor had turned away. When he turned back, his face was grave. I'm sorry. The child didn't survive. These things happen with hybrid pregnancies. The strain on human physiology. No. Elena's voice had cracked. No, I heard her cry. I heard. Trauma plays tricks on the mind, the doctor said gently. You need rest. We'll help you through this. Something cold had pricked her arm. The world had dissolved into fog. When Elena woke days later, the grief was there, but muted, distant, like it belonged to someone else. She'd been given a substantial sum of money, signed more papers, and been sent home. The clinic had vanished within a month. No record of it remained. Elena had tried to forget, but her body never had. The door opened. Alaric Nocturne entered, and the room seemed to shrink around his presence. He closed the door behind him, but didn't sit. Instead, he stood across the table, studying Elena with those impossible silver-blue eyes. Your name? Elena Vale. Where are you from? The Outer Mortal District, 4th Ward. How long have you worked in my household? 2 weeks, Your Majesty. Have we met before tonight? No. Are you certain? Elena met his gaze, despite every instinct screaming at her to look away. I would remember meeting you. Something flickered across his face. He placed both palms flat on the table and leaned forward. My daughter has never spoken. Not to physicians who've practiced medicine for centuries. Not to me. His voice dropped. Yet she speaks to you, reaches for you, call you by a title that should mean nothing to her. I don't understand it either, Elena whispered. Look at me. She did. Alaric's expression was unreadable, but his eyes were searching, cataloging. He looked at the curve of her jaw, the shape of her nose, the gold green of her eyes. From somewhere above them, muffled by stone and distance, came Lyra's voice again. Still crying, still calling. Mama. Elena gasped. The sound hit her like a physical blow. Her hand flew to her stomach, pressing against the ache that flared there. Her vision blurred. Alaric noticed. His eyes narrowed. You feel that? It wasn't a question. Elena nodded, unable to speak. Where? She pressed her hand harder against her abdomen. Here. I've felt it for years. Since. She stopped. Since when? His voice was sharp now. Elena's throat tightened. Since I lost my baby 3 years ago. The silence that followed was absolute. Alaric straightened slowly. His expression was carefully blank, but his hands had curled into fists. Bruno, he called without turning. The door opened immediately. Move her to the moon tower. East wing. Comfortable quarters. Post guards, but treat her as a guest. He paused. And bring Lyra to the same floor. Your Majesty. Bruno hesitated. The child has never been separated from your chambers. She won't be separated for long. Alaric's jaw tightened. I need to confirm something first. An hour later, Elena sat in a room that was beautiful in its darkness. White stone walls, a four-poster bed with silver linens, a window overlooking snow-covered gardens. Guards stood outside her door. Not a prisoner, but not free. She'd been given fresh clothes, water, food she couldn't eat. Her mind was spinning too fast. 3 years ago. The clinic. The masked doctor. The baby I heard cry. Then she heard it. Soft footsteps in the corridor. A child's uneven breathing. The door opened. Kasia entered first, looking grim. Then came Alaric, carrying Lyra. The child's face was tear-streaked, her eyes swollen from crying. The moment she saw Elena, her entire body lurched forward. Mama. Alaric set her down. Lyra ran across the room and threw herself into Elena's arms with the desperate force of someone who'd been drowning and finally found air. Elena caught her instinctively. The child buried her face in Elena's neck, small body shaking with exhausted sobs. And then silence. Not the terrible silence of before, but peace. Lyra's breathing evened. Her grip on Elena's shirt loosened. Within minutes, impossibly, she was asleep. Elena looked up at Alaric, tears streaming down her face. The vampire king stared at his daughter, at the child who had never slept peacefully, never stopped fighting sleep, never trusted anyone enough to let go. She's never done that, he said quietly. Not once. He looked at Elena, and for the first time, she saw something besides control in his expression. Fear. Tomorrow, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, we find out the truth. Dawn never truly came to House Nocturne. The sun rose somewhere beyond the enchanted mists that shrouded the estate, but inside the ancient halls, time existed in perpetual twilight. Elena woke to find Lyra still curled against her chest, breathing softly, one small hand fisted in Elena's borrowed nightgown. For a moment, one brief, impossible moment, everything felt right, complete. Then the door opened. Dr. Severin Cade entered with the quiet authority of someone who'd walked these halls for centuries. He was tall and thin, with silver hair pulled back in a neat queue and eyes the color of winter fog. He wore the formal robes of the court physician, deep burgundy with silver embroidery that marked his rank. Behind him came Alaric, looking like he hadn't slept. His jaw was tight, his movements controlled but tense. Doctor, Alaric said quietly, examine them both. Cade's expression remained neutral, but Elena saw his gaze sharpen as he looked between her and the sleeping child. He moved closer, setting down his leather medical case. Your Majesty, if I may ask, what exactly am I examining for? Explanations. Alaric's voice was blade-thin. My daughter spoke for the first time last night. To her. He gestured at Elena. I want to know why. Cade's hands, which had been reaching for his stethoscope, paused for just a fraction of a second. I see. Well, selective mutism can break unexpectedly. Environmental triggers, emotional stimuli. She called her mama. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. Cade recovered smoothly. Children often form attachments to caregivers. The young princess may have simply responded to maternal energy, a nurturing presence she's been lacking. Don't. Alaric's voice dropped to something dangerous. Don't insult my intelligence. Cade straightened, his composure fracturing at the edges. Your Majesty, I assure you, there is a rational explanation. Then provide one. Now. The doctor glanced at Elena, then at Lyra. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully measured. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Alaric studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Bruno, stay with them. The shadow guard entered and positioned himself by the door as Alaric and Cade stepped into the corridor. But the door didn't close completely. Elena shifted carefully, settling Lyra more comfortably against her shoulder. The child murmured something incoherent and didn't wake. Through the gap in the door, Elena could hear fragments of conversation. Medical records are clear, Your Majesty. The Queen's pregnancy was documented every step. Show me. A pause. The rustle of parchment. Here. Weekly examinations. Blood work. Magical resonance tests. Everything was normal until... Cade's voice faltered. Until what? Alaric's tone could have frozen fire. Until the final month. There's a gap. 2 weeks where no examinations were recorded. Why? The notes indicate the Queen requested privacy. That she was uncomfortable with the frequency of... My wife never requested anything of the sort. Alaric's voice was deadly quiet now. She wanted that child documented, protected, and monitored. She would never have. Your Majesty, I cannot explain administrative oversights from 3 years ago. Then explain this. The sound of more papers. These blood records. The magical resonance markers. They're wrong. I don't understand. Yes, you do. Elena heard footsteps. Someone being backed against a wall. Lyra's blood markers indicate hybrid traits. Human and vampire. But my wife was fully turned 2 centuries ago. There shouldn't be any human markers in our child's blood at all. Cade's response was barely audible. Genetic anomalies can. You have one chance, Severin. Alaric's voice was ice and fury. One chance to tell me the truth before I have you dragged before the council and executed for treason. What did you do? The silence stretched. It was for the realm, Cade whispered finally. For the stability of the throne. Elena's breath caught. She pressed closer to the door. Explain. Now. The child was never meant to be questioned. Her bloodline was supposed to be absolute. But complications arose. Complications with the Queen's pregnancy that threatened both her life and the succession. Alternative measures were taken. Approved by, he stopped. Approved by whom? I cannot say. You will say, or you will die where you stand. Before Cade could respond, a scream shattered the tension. Elena whirled around. Kasia had entered through a side door, carrying a breakfast tray. The silver pitcher she'd been holding now lay on the floor, its contents deep red liquid, steaming and eating through the stone like acid. Poison, Kasia breathed, backing away. That was meant for humans. But the stone where the liquid pooled was glowing. Faint symbols, barely visible, pulsed with golden light before fading. Alaric was in the room instantly, staring at the dissolving poison. Warding magic. Protection spells. He looked at Elena, then at Lyra, who was now awake and clinging to Elena's neck. Someone tried to kill you, he said slowly. But something protected you. Cade appeared in the doorway, his face ashen. He looked at the glowing symbols, and Elena saw recognition and terror flash across his features. Bloodbound protection, he whispered. Ancient magic. It only manifests between... Between what? Alaric demanded. Between blood relations. Parent and child. The room fell silent except for Lyra's soft breathing. Alaric turned to Cade, and Elena had never seen anyone look so dangerous. Send for the courtier. Immediately. We're going to confirm what you've been hiding. He looked at Elena, and something in his expression had shifted. Not quite trusting, but certainty. Someone designed this, he said quietly. Someone stole years from both of us, and they're still here. His eyes blazed with cold fury. We're going to find out who. The ritual chamber existed in the oldest part of House Nocturne, carved from black stone that predated the kingdom itself. Elena descended the spiral stairs flanked by guards, Alaric ahead of her. Lyra clutched in her arms, refusing to be separated. The chamber was circular, its floor inscribed with silver runes that seemed to pulse with their own light. At its center stood a stone altar, and beside it, a figure draped in moonlight-colored robes. The court seer was ancient even by immortal standards, her face a map of centuries, her eyes milky white and unseeing, yet somehow aware of everything. She turned as they entered, her head tilting like a bird sensing prey. "The vampire king seeks forbidden truths," she said, her voice like wind through dead leaves. "Blood magic is not easily undone once invoked." "I don't want it undone," Alaric said. "I want answers." The seer's blind gaze found Elena. "And you, human, do you consent? The rite is painful. It will strip away lies, even those you've told yourself." Elena's arms tightened around Lyra. The child watched her with those two knowing twilight eyes, completely calm in a way she'd never been with anyone else. "Yes," Elena whispered. "I need to know. Then we begin." The seer directed Elena to the altar. Lyra whimpered when Elena tried to set her down, small hands clutching desperately at her collar. "She must be present," the seer said. "The child's blood is part of the equation." Alaric stood at the circle's edge, his expression carved from ice, but Elena saw his hands trembling. The seer produced a ceremonial blade, silver, etched with runes that hurt to look at directly. She took Elena's hand, palm up. The mother first. The cut was swift and deep. Elena gasped as blood welled up, dark red and very human. The seer guided her hand over a silver bowl, letting 3 drops fall. Then she turned to Lyra. "No," Elena said instinctively, pulling the child closer. "It must be done." Alaric nodded, his jaw tight. "Do it." The seer pricked Lyra's tiny finger. The child didn't cry. She watched with strange fascination as her blood joined Elena's in the bowl. The moment the 2 bloods touched, the chamber screamed. Light erupted from the bowl, blinding, golden, ancient. The runes on the floor blazed to life, racing around the circle in patterns that made Elena's eyes water. The temperature plummeted, then spiked, then dropped again. And Elena felt it. Every cell in her body remembered. The weight of pregnancy, the agony of birth, the desperate primal needs to hold her child. 3 years of suppressed memory crashed through the magical barriers that had kept them buried. She remembered now. All of it. If you're as hooked on this story as I am, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. We're only halfway through, and trust me, what's coming next will leave you breathless. Drop a comment and let me know. Do you think Alaric and Elena can survive what's coming? Are you Team Alaric, or do you think there's more to this story than we know? And hey, if you're binge watching from another country, shout out your location in the comments. I love seeing where my story family is tuning in from. Now, back to the story, because Malric is about to make his move, and nothing will ever be the same. The masked doctor leaned close. "The child is perfect, but she cannot be yours." Her own voice, drugged and desperate. "Please don't take her. You'll forget. It's better this way." The needle, the darkness, the lie. Elena collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Lyra immediately reached for her, small hands cupping Elena's face with surprising strength. "Mama," Lyra whispered, perfectly clear. "Mama, here. Safe." The seer's voice cut through Elena's grief. "The blood does not lie. This woman bore the child. She is the mother, bound by magic and flesh." Alaric stood frozen at the circle's edge. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "How?" The seer turned her blind gaze toward him. "The child was conceived in deception, born in secrecy, and stolen through magic. Someone wanted this truth buried." She paused. "Someone with access to the deepest chambers of your house." Alaric's head snapped toward the doorway, where Dr. Cade stood, his face ashen. "Explain," Alaric said, his voice deadly calm. "Now." Cade's composure finally shattered. "Your Majesty, the orders came from above me. I was told it was necessary." "Who gave the orders?" "Lord Malric." The name fell like a stone into still water. Your brother authorized the procedure. The queen was dying, Your Majesty. The pregnancy was killing her. There was no time. So you stole a child from a human woman and presented her as mine? The child is yours, Cade said desperately. Your blood, your genetics, combined with... He gestured helplessly at Elena. She was chosen specifically. Compatible bloodlines. The child would still be of House Nocturne. Still eligible for succession. No one would ever know. Except you knew. Alaric moved forward with predatory grace. My brother knew, and you let me believe, his voice cracked. You let me mourn my wife and raise a stolen child built on lies. It was for the realm. Get out. Alaric's voice was barely human. Get out before I kill you where you stand. Cade fled. Elena sat on the cold stone floor, Lyra wrapped around her like a small anchor. The child was speaking now, soft, fragmented words poured out as if 3 years of silence were breaking all at once. Mama warm. Mama smells nice. Mama came back. I never left, Elena whispered, tears streaming. I never knew. Oh gods, I never knew. Alaric approached slowly. He crouched beside them, and for the first time, Elena saw the ancient vampire as simply a man. Lost. Broken. I should have known, he said quietly. Something always felt wrong. She never looked at me the way she looked at you. You didn't know, Elena said. Neither of us knew. Lyra looked between them, her small face serious. Daddy sad? Alaric's breath caught. It was the first time she'd called him that. Yes, Stelina. Daddy is very sad. Lyra reached out one small hand and patted his face clumsily. Mama fix. Despite everything, Elena felt herself smile through tears. Alaric looked at her, and she saw the question in his eyes before he spoke it. What do we do now? Before Elena could answer, Bruno appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Your Majesty, Lord Malric has called an emergency council session. He's demanding an explanation for recent events. He paused. Word has spread about humans. There are those who say she's a threat to succession, to stability. Alaric rose, his expression hardening back into the mask of the vampire king. Let them come, he said quietly. They want an explanation? They'll get the truth. He looked down at Elena and Lyra, at the evidence of betrayal, at the truth his brother had tried to bury. All of it. The council chamber was a cathedral of power, vaulted ceilings lost in shadow, walls lined with the crests of vampire houses that had risen and fallen over millennia. The high table seated 12 of the realm's most ancient lords, their combined age exceeding 10,000 years. And at the far end, in the seat reserved for the king's closest advisor, sat Lord Malric Nocturne. He looked like Alaric's shadow-given form, the same sharp features, the same predatory grace, but where Alaric radiated cold control, Malric exuded calculated charm. His dark hair was shorter, his smile easier, his eyes the color of smoke. He wore formal court attire in deep emerald, his House Nocturne crest gleaming at his throat. Elena stood beside Alaric at the chamber's entrance, Lyra on her hip. The child had refused to be left behind, and Alaric hadn't fought her on it. Bruno and 4 shadow guards flanked them. Every eye in the chamber turned as they entered. Brother, Malric said, rising smoothly. His voice carried easily through the vast space. Thank you for joining us. Given the unusual circumstances, the council felt an immediate session was warranted. Unusual, Alaric repeated, his tone flat. An interesting choice of words. Malric's smile didn't falter. A human woman appears in your household. Your daughter, who has never spoken, suddenly calls her mother. Surely you understand the council's concern. He gestured to the assembled lords. We simply seek clarification. Lord Castor, ancient and skeletal, leaned forward. Is it true, Your Majesty? Has the child claimed this mortal as her mother? Yes. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Malric raised a hand for silence. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. Perhaps an enchantment? Mind magic? The child is young, impressionable. The blood rite was performed, Alaric said, witnessed by the court seer. Elena Vale is Lyra's biological mother. The silence that followed was absolute. Then chaos. Impossible. The queen. This is an insult to House Nocturne. Malric's voice cut through the uproar. Brother, please, think about what you're saying. His tone was gentle, concerned. Your wife died giving birth to that child. We all witnessed your grief. If someone has manipulated you into believing... I'm not manipulated. Alaric's voice was ice. I know exactly what happened. Someone orchestrated a deception 3 years ago. Someone with access to the royal birthing chambers. Someone who could command Dr. Cade. Malric's expression remained perfectly sympathetic. These are serious accusations. If there truly was a conspiracy, we must investigate thoroughly. He paused, letting his next words land with careful weight. But until we know the truth, surely humans should be secured. For her own protection, of course. You mean imprisoned, Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. Malric's gaze settled on her for the first time, and Elena felt the weight of centuries in that look. My dear, you must understand the delicacy of this situation. The heir to the Night Court, claiming a mortal as mother? He shook his head sadly. It destabilizes everything. Succession, law, the very foundations of our realm. The foundations built on lies? Alaric's voice was deadly quiet. Brother. Don't. Alaric stepped forward. Don't pretend to be concerned. Dr. Cade confessed. He named you. Malric's mask slipped for just a fraction of a second, a flash of something cold and calculating. Then it was gone, replaced by wounded dignity. A physician facing exile might say anything to deflect blame. He spread his hands. I loved our late queen. I would never have harmed her or orchestrated some elaborate. A crystal goblet on the table shattered. Everyone froze. Lyra had extended one small hand, her twilight eyes blazing with light that shouldn't exist in a 3-year-old. The shattered crystal was suspended in midair, fragments rotating slowly. Liar, Lyra said clearly. Hurt mama. Bad man. The fragments launched across the room. Malric moved with inhuman speed, but not fast enough. A shard sliced across his cheek, drawing a line of dark blood. The other pieces embedded themselves in the wall behind him, forming a pattern that looked disturbingly like accusatory fingers. Control your child, brother, Malric said, dabbing at the cut. But his eyes were cold now, calculating. My daughter, Alaric said, seems to be an excellent judge of character. Lord Castor stood, his voice grave. Your Majesty, the child's power is concerning. Hybrid magic is unstable, dangerous. If she's truly part human, he glanced at Elena with barely concealed disgust. Then perhaps she should be removed from the succession, for the realm's safety. Or perhaps, Malric added softly, the human should be removed. We can resolve this quietly, humanely. The child will forget in time. Elena felt Lyra's grip on her tighten. No, Elena said. I'm not leaving her. You don't have a choice, mortal. She does. Alaric's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. By ancient law, I have the right to claim protection for anyone within my household. I invoke that right for Elena Vale. Anyone who moves against her moves against me. The chamber erupted again. You cannot protect a human over the council's will. She undermines everything. This is madness. Alaric turned to face them all, and Elena saw why he'd ruled for centuries. The sheer force of his presence silenced the room. I am your king. This is my choice. Any who wish to challenge it may do so. Personally. No one moved. Malric stood slowly, straightening his collar. When he spoke, his voice was still gentle, still concerned. But his eyes promised violence. Of course, brother. Your will is law. He smiled. But consider, a king who defies tradition, who protects humans over his own kind, who allows his heir to be claimed by mortal blood. He let the words hang. Such a king invites instability. And instability, as history shows, tends to resolve itself. He bowed, perfectly proper, and walked toward the exit. As he passed Elena, he paused. "Enjoy your reunion, Miss Vale," he said softly, just loud enough for her to hear. However brief it may be. Then he was gone. The council session dissolved into tense murmurs. Lords filed out, shooting dark looks at Elena. Bruno moved closer, his hand on his weapon. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "we should return to secure quarters." Lord Malric just declared war, without saying the words. Alaric looked down at Elena and Lyra. The child had her face buried in Elena's shoulder now, trembling slightly. "I know," Alaric said. "Let him come." But as they left the chamber, Elena glanced back. Through a high window, she could see Malric standing in the courtyard below, speaking to a cluster of dark-robed figures. He looked up, as if sensing her gaze, and smiled. The moon tower became Elena's gilded cage. It wasn't a prison. The rooms were beautiful, with silk curtains and furniture carved from ancient wood. But shadow guards stood at every entrance, and Elena knew she couldn't leave without Alaric's permission. Not that she wanted to. Leaving meant leaving Lyra, and that was impossible now. The child had become her shadow, following her everywhere with fierce determination. When Elena bathed, Lyra sat on the floor playing with soap bubbles. When Elena slept, Lyra curled against her chest. When Elena tried to give her to the nursemaids, Lyra screamed until her voice went hoarse. "She's never been like this," one of the older servants whispered, watching Lyra help Elena fold linens with clumsy, eager hands. Even as an infant, she never wanted to be held. Elena ran her fingers through Lyra's moonlight hair. Maybe she just needed the right person. Alaric came every evening. At first, it was purely practical, checking on their safety, reviewing security reports with Bruno. But gradually, he stayed longer. He would sit in the chair by the window while Elena read to Lyra, watching with an expression Elena couldn't quite decipher. One night, Lyra looked up from her storybook and held out her arms to him. "Daddy, sit." Alaric froze. It was the first time she'd invited his presence rather than simply tolerating it. He moved to the floor beside them, his movements careful, uncertain. Lyra immediately crawled into his lap, then reached back for Elena's hand, pulling until Elena sat closer. "Story," Lyra commanded, pointing at the book. So Elena read, and Alaric listened, and Lyra nestled between them like she was trying to bridge an impossible gap. When the story ended and Lyra had fallen asleep, Alaric carried her to bed with a gentleness that made Elena's throat tight. "She talks more every day," he said quietly, tucking the blanket around her. "Full sentences now. Questions. Even jokes, though they rarely make sense. She's making up for lost time." "Yes." He stared down at his daughter. 3 years I had her, and she never spoke. 3 days with you, and she won't stop." There was no accusation in his voice. Just wonder. And pain. "You couldn't have known. I should have." His hands clenched on the bedpost. "I'm ancient. I've ruled for centuries. I've survived wars, assassinations, political machinations that would have destroyed lesser men. And I couldn't see that my own brother had stolen my child's voice." Elena stood, moving to his side. "He didn't steal her voice. He stole her mother. There's a difference." Alaric looked at her, and Elena saw something crack in his carefully maintained control. "I raised her thinking I'd failed. That I wasn't enough. That my love wasn't." He stopped, jaw tight. "I haven't let myself feel anything real in 200 years. And then she spoke to you and I realized I don't know how to be what she needs." "Yes, you do." Elena placed her hand over his on the bedpost. "You're learning. That's all any parent can do." His hand turned under hers, fingers brushing her palm. The touch was brief, but it sent heat through Elena's entire body. "You're braver than I am," he said quietly. "You leaped into this world without hesitation. No power, no immortality, just love." I didn't have a choice. We always have a choice. His eyes met hers. You chose her, despite the danger, despite everything you've lost. So did you, Elena said. You defied the council for us. That was strategy. Was it? He didn't answer. The formal declaration came 3 days later. The great hall was packed, every noble house, every council member, every courtier with enough rank to claim a seat. Malric stood in the shadows near the back, his expression unreadable. Alaric sat on the throne of House Nocturne, a monument of black stone and silver that had witnessed centuries of proclamations. Elena stood to his right, Lyra on her hip. The child watched the assembled crowd with wide, solemn eyes. I have gathered you here, Alaric began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the vast space, to make 3 declarations. The crowd stilled. First, Elena Vale is under my personal protection. Any threat to her is a threat to the crown. Anyone who moves against her will answer me directly. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Second, Lyra Nocturne remains my heir, not by blood alone but by choice. She is of House Nocturne, and she will inherit this realm when I am gone. The murmurs grew louder. Several nobles exchanged dark looks. Third, Alaric stood, and the authority in his presence silenced every voice. The laws forbidding unions between vampire and human are antiquated. They will be reviewed. The Night Court will no longer punish love for the crime of being inconvenient. The hall erupted. This is madness. You cannot overturn centuries of law. The human has bewitched him. Alaric raised one hand. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Frost crept across the windows. I am your king, he said, his voice deadly soft. My word is law. Those who cannot accept this are free to leave my court. Permanently. No one moved. Elena felt Lyra shift in her arms. The child was watching her father with something like awe. Daddy's strong, she whispered. Yes, Elena whispered back. He is. That night, after the nobles had dispersed and the shadow guards had secured the moon tower, Lyra sat between Elena and Alaric on the floor, playing with wooden blocks. She built a tower, clumsy but determined, then looked up at both of them. Are we safe now? Alaric and Elena exchanged a glance. The truth was complicated. Malric was still out there, still plotting. The council was fractured. Danger lurked in every shadow. But Alaric reached out, placing one hand on Lyra's head and the other, after a moment's hesitation, on Elena's shoulder. Yes, Stelina, he said. We're safe. Lyra smiled, satisfied, and returned to her blocks. Elena felt the weight of Alaric's hand on her shoulder, strong, protective, present. When she looked up, she found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. Not the vampire king. Just a man. Just someone learning to feel again. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For choosing us. His hand tightened slightly on her shoulder. You make it sound like there was another option. There wasn't. They both knew it. Outside, snow continued to fall. And for the first time in 3 years, Elena felt the phantom ache in her chest begin to heal. The eclipse was coming. Elena felt it in her bones, a wrongness in the air, like the world holding its breath. The court seers had announced it weeks ago, a celestial alignment that occurred once every century when the moon would swallow the sun and magic itself would bend. It's a time of vulnerability, Alaric explained one evening, staring out at the darkening sky. Ancient magic weakens. Protective wards are thin. Every vampire in the realm will feel it. Is it dangerous? Only if someone knows how to exploit it. Lyra, playing with her wooden blocks nearby, looked up suddenly. Bad man coming. Elena's blood went cold. What? The bad man. The one who lies. Lyra pointed toward the window. He's coming when the sky goes dark. Alaric and Elena exchanged a glance. Malric hasn't been seen in court for 3 days, Bruno reported that evening, his expression grim. His apartments are empty. His household guards are gone. Send scouts, Alaric ordered. Find him. But the scouts returned with nothing. Lord Malric Nocturne had vanished like smoke. The eclipse began at midnight. Elena stood in the moon tower, watching as darkness consumed the sky. It wasn't natural darkness, it was absolute, suffocating wrong. The temperature plummeted. Frost crept across the windows in intricate, cruel patterns. Lyra had been restless all evening, clinging to Elena with unusual desperation. Now she stood at the window, small hand pressed against the glass, tears streaming down her face. "Mama, don't let the dark take me." "I won't, sweetheart. I promise." The ward shattered. The sound was like glass breaking inside Elena's skull. The shadow guards at the door stumbled, crying out in pain. The protective symbols carved into the walls flickered and died. And then they came. Figures in black, moving with inhuman speed. 6 of them, faces hidden behind masks, magic crackling around their hands like lightning. Bruno roared, drawing his sword, but one of the attackers hit him with a spell that sent him crashing through the wall. The other guards fell within seconds. Elena grabbed Lyra and ran. She made it 3 steps before something cold wrapped around her ankle and pulled. She hit the ground hard, Lyra tumbling from her arms with a scream. "Mama!" Hands seized the child. Lyra's magic flared. Wild, desperate, sending one attacker flying. But there were too many. They wrapped her in something that glowed with suppression runes, silencing her power. "No!" Elena screamed, reaching for her daughter. A boot came down on her back, pinning her. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Lyra's terrified face disappearing through a portal of swirling shadow. Elena woke to Alaric's voice. "Find them. Tear this realm apart if you have to. I want my daughter back. Now." She was in Alaric's private chambers, lying on a divan. Her head throbbed. When she sat up, the room spun. Lyra. Gone. Alaric's voice was hollow. He stood by the window, his back to her, every line of his body radiating barely contained fury. "They took her during the eclipse. My guards are dead. The wards are broken." Elena forced herself to stand, ignoring the pain. "Malric." "Yes." Alaric turned, and Elena recoiled. His eyes were no longer silver blue. They were black, completely black, bleeding shadows. Ancient vampire fury. "He left this." He held out a piece of parchment. Elena took it with shaking hands. "Brother, the child is safe. For now." She has such potential, such power locked inside her hybrid blood. Imagine what she could become with the right guidance. What she could be used for. You have until the eclipse ends. Come to the Blood Cathedral. Alone. Bring the human if you wish, she'll want to say goodbye. Surrender the throne, and I'll let Lyra live. Refuse, and I'll show you exactly what happens when human weakness is burned away by vampire ambition. Your choice. Elena's hands crumbled the parchment. The Blood Cathedral. Where is it? The Northern Wastes. A place of old magic, older than this kingdom. Alaric's voice was razor-sharp. It suspended over the abyss, a chasm that supposedly leads to the realm of the dead. Malric chose it deliberately. If Lyra falls. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. How long until the eclipse ends? 4 hours. Then we leave now. Alaric looked at her. You're not coming. Like hell I'm not. Elena, Malric wants you there. He wants to use you as leverage to prove that human attachment is weakness. If you go, if I stay, I'll go insane. Elena stepped closer, meeting his inhuman gaze without flinching. That's my daughter. Our daughter. I'm not letting you face this alone. I've faced worse alone, and look where that got you. Her voice softened. Alaric, please, don't shut me out. Not now. Something in his expression cracked. The shadow bled from his eyes, leaving only pain. If something happens to you, then we both die trying to save her. Together. The word hung between them. Together. Alaric nodded once, then turned to Bruno, who had limped into the room, his armor dented but his sword still in hand. Assemble the Shadow Guard. Full war contingent. We leave in 10 minutes. Your Majesty. This isn't the negotiation, Bruno. My brother has declared war. Let's give him one. The journey north was a nightmare of speed and shadow. They traveled through the Vale, a realm between realms where distance meant nothing and time bent like water. When they emerged, Elena's lungs burned with cold. Snow stretched endlessly in every direction, and ahead, rising from the wasteland like a broken finger pointing at the sky, stood the Blood Cathedral. It was an impossibly tall, black stone that seemed to absorb light, its spire connected to the ground by a single narrow bridge. Below it, the abyss yawned, a chasm of absolute darkness that made Elena's stomach turn just looking at it. At the cathedral's entrance, barely visible against the stone, stood a small figure. Lyra, Elena whispered. Alaric's hand found hers. His grip was iron. Protective. Whatever happens, he said quietly, don't let go. They stepped onto the bridge and walked toward the end of everything. The bridge was narrow, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. No railings, just ancient stone slick with ice, stretching across the abyss like a scar across the void. Elena's breath came in white clouds. Each step felt like walking toward the edge of the world. The Blood Cathedral loomed ahead, its entrance a mouth of darkness. As they drew closer, Elena could see Lyra more clearly, standing at the threshold, so small against the massive doors, her moonlight hair whipping in the wind. But she wasn't alone. Malric stepped from the shadows behind her, one hand resting on the child's shoulder. Lyra's face was tear-streaked but defiant. When she saw Elena and Alaric, she tried to run forward, but Malric's grip tightened. Brother, Malric called, his voice carrying across the wind. And you brought the human. How predictable. They reached the cathedral entrance. Alaric positioned himself slightly in front of Elena, every muscle coiled for violence. Let her go, Malric. In time. Malric smiled. He looked different here, less polished, more feral. His eyes gleamed with something ancient and hungry. First, I think we should talk. You've come all this way. Surely you want to understand why. I know why. Power. The throne. The same story as every traitor before you. You insult me, brother. Malric's smile widened. It was never just about the throne. It was about you. Perfect Alaric. The beloved king. The ancient warrior. The one father chose over me, century after century. His voice dripped venom. Do you know what it's like, living in your shadow? Watching you receive every honor, every accolade, while I remain despair. The contingency? So you stole my child. I gave you a weapon. Malric looked down at Lyra, his expression almost tender. This beautiful, powerful child. Hybrid blood. Human and vampire combined. Do you have any idea what she's capable of? What could she become with proper training? She's not a weapon. She's a person. She's leveraged. Malric's hand moved to Lyra's throat, not choking, but threatening. And right now, she's the only thing keeping you from killing me where I stand. Elena felt Alaric vibrate with barely restrained fury beside her. What do you want? Alaric's voice was glacier cold. Simple. Abdicate. Name me king. Walk away from the throne you've hoarded for 6 centuries. Malric paused. Do that, and I'll let the child live. You can even keep your human pet. Mama's not a pet. Lyra shouted suddenly, her small voice fierce despite her terror. Malric's expression darkened. Quiet, child. No. You're bad. You hurt Mama. You. Malric's hand moved in a blur. The spell hit Lyra like a physical blow, sending her stumbling backward, toward the edge, toward the abyss. Time fragmented. Elena saw Lyra's feet slip on the ice, saw her small body tip backward, arms pinwheeling, saw the terror in those twilight eyes. She didn't think so. She ran. Elena, no. Alaric's shout was distant underwater. Elena's boots hit ice, skidded, but she didn't slow. She reached the edge just as Lyra disappeared over it, and jumped. The fall was infinite. Wind screamed past Elena's ears. Darkness swallowed everything. Her hand stretched into the void, searching, desperate. There. Her fingers closed around small wrist. Lyra's weight jerked her arm so hard Elena felt something tear, but she held on. Mama, I've got you, I've got you. The wall of the abyss rushed up to meet them. The impact was annihilation. Elena's back hit stone, and she felt ribs crack like dry wood. Her shoulder dislocated with a sound that would haunt her dreams. Pain exploded through her body in waves so intense she couldn't scream. But her arms were still wrapped around Lyra. They'd landed on an outcropping, a narrow ledge of rock jutting from the abyss wall, barely 5 feet wide. Below them, darkness stretched forever. Mama, Mama, wake up. Lyra's voice was panicked, small hands patting Elena's face. Elena forced her eyes open. Every breath was agony. She tasted copper. I'm here, she whispered. You're safe. I've got you. Above them, the sound of violence. Alaric had been ancient before Rome fell. He'd fought in wars that predated written history. He'd killed enemies too numerous to count, in ways too brutal to speak of. But he'd never felt rage like this. Malric barely had time to smile before Alaric was on him. No magic. No strategy. Just pure, animalistic fury. Alaric first connected with Malric's jaw with enough force to shatter stone. His brother flew backward, crashing through the cathedral doors. Alaric followed, grabbing him by the throat and slamming him into the ground. She was a child. Each word was punctuated by another blow. A child. Malric tried to cast a spell. Alaric caught his hand and broke it. The bones snapped with a sound like a gunshot. Brother, wait. We can still. Alaric's hand closed around Malric's throat. Not choking. Crushing. You wanted the throne? Alaric's voice was barely human. You wanted power? You could have asked. You could have challenged me honorably. Instead, you stole years from me. You stole a mother from my daughter. You tried to murder the woman I. He stopped. The realization crashed through his rage like ice water. The woman I love. Malric saw it. Even dying, he saw it, and he laughed a wet, choking sound. She made you weak. No, Alaric said quietly. She made me human. He twisted. Malric's neck snapped. The ancient vampire crumbled to dust, centuries of existence undone in an instant. Alaric stood, breathing hard, his hands shaking. Then he turned and ran back to the edge. Elena. It took an hour to get them back up. Bruno and the shadow guards lowered ropes. Elena could barely hold on, her body broken, but somehow she managed. Lyra clung to her neck the entire time, refusing to let go even when they reached solid ground. Alaric caught Elena as she collapsed. Don't, she whispered when he tried to examine her injuries. Lyra first. She's fine. You're dying. Then hurry. His hands glowed with healing magic, ancient, powerful. Elena felt her ribs knit, her shoulder wrenched back into place. The pain receded slowly, reluctantly. When she could finally breathe without agony, she looked up into Alaric's face. He was crying. Centuries-old vampire king, crying openly, his tears falling onto her cheeks. Don't ever do that again, he whispered. I'd do it 1,000 times. I know. That's what terrifies me. Lyra wiggled between them, small hands cupping both their faces. We won, she said simply. Bad man gone. Are we going home now? Alaric looked at the cathedral, at the bridge, at the abyss that had nearly claimed everything. Then he looked at Elena, broken, brave, human his, and nodded. Yes, Stellina. We go home. 6 months later, spring came to House Nocturne for the first time in living memory. The eternal winter that had gripped the estate for centuries began to thaw. Flowers bloomed in the ancient gardens, hesitant at first, then bursting forth in riots of color that stunned the immortal courtiers who'd forgotten what seasons looked like. Elena stood at the window of what had once been the Moon Tower and was now simply called home, watching Lyra chase butterflies across the lawn. The child's laughter echoed off the stone walls, a sound that had become commonplace enough that servants no longer stopped to marvel at it. Though sometimes Elena still did. "She's gotten faster," Alaric said, appearing beside her with a silent grace she'd grown accustomed to. He held 2 cups of tea, mortal tea, not blood wine, and offered her one. "She's been practicing with Bruno. He says she'll be impossible to catch by summer." "She already is." They watched in comfortable silence as Lyra successfully cornered a butterfly, then carefully let it go when it landed on her palm. "The council meets in an hour," Alaric said quietly. "Are you ready?" Elena took a breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." The great hall had been transformed. The dark banners had been replaced with lighter fabrics, deep blues and silvers instead of black and crimson. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted somehow, though Elena couldn't quite explain how. Perhaps it was just the absence of fear. Or perhaps it was the absence of Malric. Dr. Severin Cade had been the first to face judgment. He'd stood before the council 3 months ago, ancient and hollow, confessing to decades of deception. The sentence had been exile beyond the veil, banishment to the spaces between realms where time moves differently and return was impossible. He'd looked at Elena before he left, his expression unreadable. "I thought I was protecting the realm," he'd said. "I see now I was only protecting lies." Then he was gone. Others followed. Nobles who'd supported Malric's conspiracy, guards who'd looked the other way, courtiers who'd known and stayed silent. Some were exiled, some stripped of titles, some merely censured. The night court was being rebuilt, one truth at a time. Today was the final piece. Elena entered the great hall to absolute silence. Every seat was filled, nobles, ambassadors, representatives from vampire houses across the realm. They watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled hostility to, surprisingly, respect. She wore a gown of deep midnight blue, simple but elegant. No crown, that wasn't what today was about. Lyra walked beside her, holding her hand, wearing a smaller version of the same dress. At the head of the hall, Alaric sat on the throne, but he rose as they approached. "Elena Vale," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber with centuries of authority. "You were brought into this court under deception. You lost years of your life to lies. You nearly lost your daughter to conspiracy. And yet you stand here, not with vengeance, but with grace." He descended the steps. The laws of this realm were built on the assumption that humans were lesser, temporary, unworthy of eternity. He stopped before her. "But you have proven that mortality does not mean weakness, that human hearts can be stronger than immortal stones, that love, true love, requires no magic to endure." He held out his hand. In it rested a circlet of silver, delicate but unmistakably regal. "Elena Vale, mother of my heir, savior of my house, I name you Queen Mother of the Night Court. Not by conquest, not by blood, but by choice, by sacrifice, by the simple truth that you have earned what centuries of immortals never could." He placed the circlet on her head. Respect. The hall held its breath. Then, slowly, one by one, the assembled nobles stood. They didn't bow, not yet, but they stood, and that was enough. Lyra's formal coronation as heir came at sunset. The child stood before the court, no longer silent, no longer frightened. She wore a small crown of silver and moonstone, and she looked between Elena and Alaric with absolute confidence. The high priestess, ancient, blind, unchanged by politics, approached with a ceremonial chalice. Lyra Nocturne, blood of 2 worlds, child of dawn and dusk. Do you accept the mantle of heir? Do you swear to lead with wisdom, to rule with justice, to protect both the eternal and the fleeting? Lyra looked at Elena. Elena nodded. "I do," Lyra said clearly. "Then speak your truth before this court. What is the foundation of your rule?" Lyra had practiced this part. Elena had helped her memorize the traditional response: power and law, blood and duty. But Lyra looked at Elena, then at Alaric, then back at the assembled court, and smiled. Family, she said simply. The word hung in the air like a bell. Then something impossible happened. The chandeliers, ancient crystals that had hung dark and cold for centuries, began to glow, not with fire or magic, but with warm, golden light. It spread through the hall like sunrise, chasing away shadows that had lived in the corners since before memory. The nobles gasped. Some cried out in shock. Others simply stared in wonder. Elena felt Alaric's hand find hers. His fingers intertwined with hers, warm despite his immortal cold, and she felt something she'd never expected to feel in this place. Hope. That night, after the celebrations had ended and Lyra had finally fallen asleep in the nursery, Elena and Alaric stood on the balcony, overlooking the realm. She changed the light. Elena said softly. How? I don't know. Alaric's arm was around her waist, solid and protective. The court historians say the crystals were enchanted centuries ago to reflect the heart of the realm. When we ruled by fear, they dimmed. Perhaps now. Now we rule by something else. Yes. Elena leaned into him, fitting against his side like she'd been made for this. Are you happy? Alaric was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'd forgotten what happiness felt like. I think, yes. I think I am. He turned her to face him, his hands framing her face with impossible gentleness. You were supposed to be temporary. A mystery to solve. A problem to manage. His thumb brushed her cheek. Instead, you became everything. Alaric. I love you. The words came out rough, unpracticed, but utterly sincere. I've loved you since you jumped into the abyss without hesitation. Maybe before. Maybe from the moment Lyra looked at you and knew, somehow knew, that you were hers. That you were ours. Elena's breath caught. You're immortal. I'm human. I'll age. I'll die. Then I'll love you for however long I have you. And when you're gone, I'll love you still. He pressed his forehead to hers. That's what you taught me. That doesn't mean less. It means precious. Elena kissed him. It was soft and desperate and full of everything words couldn't hold. When they pulled apart, she was crying. I love you too, she whispered. Impossible, stubborn, ancient vampire king. He smiled, truly smiled, and Elena realized she'd never seen him happy until this moment. Behind them, through the open door, they could hear Lyra mumbling in her sleep. Mama, Daddy, home. Yes, Stellina, Alaric whispered into the night. We're home. The night court had been ruled by blood and fear for millennia. But on this night, under stars that seemed to shine brighter than they had in centuries, it was ruled by something new. Something human. Something eternal. Love. The end.